September 17, 1944. 14,000 feet above Eindhoven, the morning sky over the Netherlands vibrated with the sound of engines. The largest airborne operation in history, Operation Market Garden, had begun. Parachutes bloomed across the Dutch countryside, like pale flowers falling from heaven. Below them, the fields of Brabant trembled under the endless thrum of Allied aircraft, C-47s, gliders, and circling higher still, something else entirely. Among them flew the P-47 Thunderbolt, an aircraft once mocked, now feared. Its wide wings carried a burden that seemed almost absurd for a single seat. Fighter, 2,500 pounds of bombs, half the payload of a flying fortress. Yet here it was, moving with the self-assurance of a machine that knew precisely what it had become. The Luftwaffe, scrambling to respond, had no idea what they were facing. To German pilots strapping into Messerschmitts that morning, the idea that a single-engine fighter could carry such destructive weight defied logic. Fighters were for combat. Bombers were for destruction. What they saw rising from the clouds over Eindhoven was something new, something the textbooks of war had not prepared them for. The P-47 Thunderbolt had rewritten the rules. A year earlier, the Germans had dismissed it. Too heavy, too clumsy, too American. It was a brute, not a duelist. A machine built for power, not grace. They laughed at its size, 10,000 pounds empty. Double that of a Messerschmitt? 109. The Luftwaffe's analysts had studied its blueprints, weighed its performance numbers, and concluded that the Americans had built an airplane too big for its own ambition. Yet hidden inside that industrial arrogance was a quiet revolution. Beneath the armor, plating, and the steel tubing was a truth only the battlefield could reveal. Strength could be a form of strategy. The P-47's massive radial engine, the Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double, wasp-roared like an industrial cathedral, 18 cylinders of forged precision, burning aviation fuel at a rate that made quartermasters wince. To the engineers at Republic Aviation, this wasn't a flaw. It was a foundation. The engine's reliability, its capacity to absorb punishment, its ability to bring a wounded pilot home when nothing else could, all of it form the soul of what the Thunderbolt would become. In April 1943, when the 4th Fighter Group first took the P-47 into combat, the Luftwaffe saw nothing revolutionary. The aircraft struggled to climb, and its limited range kept it tethered to England's coasts. Its pilots joked grimly that they needed a map not to find Germany, but to find their way back to the Channel before running dry. German fighters used these limitations, mercilessly forcing the Thunderbolts into climbing duels they couldn't win, or turning battles they couldn't sustain. But war, unlike doctrine, rewards those who learn fast. By late 1943, P-47 pilots began doing something no manual had prescribed. Returning from escort missions, they strafed whatever they could see: locomotives, convoys, fuel depots. Their guns sate Browning 50 caliber machine guns, spitting 12 pounds of lead per second, shredded anything that moved. What began as improvisation evolved into revelation. The fighter that couldn't escort far enough could still devastate everything within reach. By November, the Thunderbolt was carrying bombs. Engineers at Republic installed the first shackles beneath its wings, simple mechanisms rated for 500-pound payloads. On November 25, 1943, 8 Thunderbolts attacked the Luftwaffe airfield at Saint-Omer, France. 2 hangars destroyed, 5 aircraft damaged, no losses. The fighter had become a bomber, and the transformation was irreversible. What began as field adaptation soon became design philosophy. Wing spars were reinforced, bomb release circuits re-engineered, gun sights recalibrated for dive angles that would terrify most pilots. By early 1944, the P-47 could carry 10 rockets or 2 1,000-pound bombs, raining destruction with a precision the Germans could neither match nor predict. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, the full scale of that transformation became clear. Nearly 2,000 Thunderbolt sorties swept over Normandy, their guns and bombs carving paths for the advancing infantry below. In a single day, they dropped 525 tons of bombs and fired over 100,000 rounds of ammunition. The Luftwaffe's airfields, convoys, bridges, everything that sustained the German front was torn apart by aircraft they had once called obsolete. By the summer of 1944, Allied soldiers on the ground came to recognize the P-47's sound long before they saw it. That deep rattling growl meant salvation from above. For German troops, it meant annihilation in the open. The Thunderbolt could dive faster than any fighter in the sky, 1 to 400 kilometers per hour in a vertical, plunge turning air into weapon. Even the Luftwaffe's greatest aces, men like Günther Rall, learned to respect it. "When they chased me," he said after the war, "I could do nothing else." The machine that shot him down in May 1944 was not the ponderous interceptor he once mocked. It was the future one with 8 guns, 1,000 horsepower advantage, and the ability to destroy tanks, trains, and aircraft alike. The P-47's evolution revealed a truth the Germans refused to accept. Adaptability beats perfection. The Luftwaffe's brilliance lay in specialization fighters designed for combat, bombers for destruction, tank killers for precision strikes. The Americans built one machine that could do it all. By the time the P-47 entered full production, it had become the universal soldier of the sky. It fought at 30,000 feet and skimmed treetops in the same mission. It could strafe one moment, dive bomb the next, and then climb back into the clouds to duel an enemy fighter. The Luftwaffe's tactical vocabulary simply didn't have a word for such versatility. The mathematics of destruction now favored the Allies. A single P-47 squadron's 16 aircraft could deliver more bombs in one day than a squadron of B-17s could in a week. And unlike bombers that demanded crews of 10, the Thunderbolt required only one man and a handful of mechanics. In the calculus of war, efficiency had become a weapon. In August 1944, during the Falaise Pocket, that weapon reached its apex. As the German 7th Army tried to retreat through narrow valleys of Normandy, P-47s struck in endless shifts. Dawn to dusk, they prowled the skies, their rockets slashing down like divine judgment. Locomotives exploded into fountains of black smoke. Tanks vanished under direct hits. Horses, trucks, convoys all burned under the steady rhythm of machine gun fire. Within 10 days, the Falaise battlefield became a graveyard of twisted metal and broken ambition. 1/3 of all German vehicles destroyed there fell victim to air attack, and most of those to Thunderbolts. By September, the P-47 carried the new HVAR, rockets 5-inch monsters capable of piercing the armor of a Tiger tank. 10 per aircraft, each delivering the force of a naval broadside. The Luftwaffe's airfields, already crippled, now faced the daily terror of low-flying P-47s that could obliterate a runway or fuel dump before any jet could leave the ground. From those skies over Eindhoven, on that fateful day in September 1944, the transformation was complete. The Americans had taken an ungainly interceptor and forged it into the most formidable multi-role aircraft of the war. Every bomb that fell, every tank that burned, every bridge that collapsed beneath its rockets whispered the same message. The age of specialized war machines was ending. The fighter had become a bomber. The bomber had become a scalpel. And the Luftwaffe, once masters of the air, were learning that their failure to adapt would cost them the war. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes. Snow fell thick over the forests of Belgium, muffling everything but the distant growl of engines. At 05:30, the German artillery opened fire, thousands of guns blazing as one. The sky itself seemed to crack. Within hours, the American front line was chaos. Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge, had begun. Through that first day, the clouds hung low and merciless. The Allied armies, masters of air power, suddenly found themselves blind. The skies belonged to the storm, and with them, to the enemy. German tanks, Panthers, Tigers, Jagged Panthers rolled forward under cover of weather, so thick that even the Thunderbolt's roar could not pierce it. For the first time in months, the battlefield belonged to the Wehrmacht. In muddy, frozen foxholes, American soldiers listened helplessly to the sound of engines echoing from the forest. Tanks were approaching, and there would be no rescue from above, not yet. Pilots sat grounded on airfields across England and France, staring into the grayness, listening to reports of retreat and panic. Among them, at a snow-dusted airstrip near St. Dizier, Captain William Mac McLean paced beside his P-47, Dit's olive drab wings crusted with frost. For 2 days, he and his men had waited for orders that could not come. There was nothing to see, nothing to strike. The weather had chained the most powerful air force on Earth to the ground. But on the morning of December 23rd, the chains broke. At 07:15, the fog began to lift. By 08, a weak sun broke through the clouds, glinting off the snow like a promise. The message went out to every Allied airbase in northern Europe. Misyango. In minutes, the skies filled with thunder. Over 1,200 P-47s and P-51s launched across the front, joined by hundreds of Typhoons and Mustangs. The German advance, so methodical, so unstoppable, was suddenly exposed. Convoys stretched across miles of snow-choked roads. Fuel columns jammed nose to tail. The Thunderbolts came for them. Flying low, sometimes barely 50 feet above the trees, they attacked in endless waves. Pilots fired until their gun barrels glowed red, until smoke and snow blurred the horizon. Tanks exploded beneath them. Ammunition trucks vanished in fireballs that scorched the forest bare. Every strike, every run added another fracture to the German offensive. In less than 72 hours, the Luftwaffe's dream of victory in the West collapsed into ruin. By December 26th, the P-47s of the 365th Fighter Group alone had destroyed 105 tanks, 31 locomotives, and hundreds of vehicles. Roads that had once carried the spearhead of the German army were now littered with burning steel. The Allies had not just regained control of the air, they had weaponized it. For the men on the ground, the change was immediate and divine. Infantrymen in foxholes cheered as the familiar growl echoed overhead. "The Jugs are back," they shouted, using the Thunderbolt's affectionate nickname. To them, that sound meant survival. The Germans called it something else. Der Brüllende. Panzerjäger, the roaring tank destroyer. In truth, the P-47 had become far more than that. Its heavy armor, so often criticized, let it absorb punishment that would rip a lesser fighter apart. Its radial engine could keep running with cylinders shot away, oil pressure dropping, flames licking the cowling. There are stories of Thunderbolts limping home on half a wing, missing elevators, or with engines frozen solid yet still spinning. And yet, even with all its power, the machine was nothing without the men who flew it. Among them was Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreschione of the top American aces of the war. By mid-1944, Gabreschi had scored 28 victories, all in the P-47. He described it not as a fighter, but as a friend. You could hit it, you could burn it, you could almost break it and she'd still bring you home, he said. Another, Captain Robert Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group, once limped 200 miles back to England after being hit by over 20mm shells, his cockpit filled with smoke. His canopy jammed shut, his rudder shredded. Yet the Thunderbolt refused to die. That was its secret, brute survival. By 1945, the Thunderbolt had flown more than 500,000 combat sorties. It destroyed over 9,000 enemy aircraft and tens of thousands of ground targets. Across Europe, it became a legend not through elegance, but endurance. It didn't glide, it endured. It didn't dance, it crushed. When the war ended, Republic Aviation tallied the numbers. For every Thunderbolt lost in combat, 10 enemy aircraft had fallen. Its loss ratio was among the lowest of any fighter in the war. The Luftwaffe, by then, was a shadow of itself, its airfields shattered, its pilots burned out. The skies over Europe belonged to the P-47. But the story didn't end in Europe. Thousands of miles away, in the Pacific, the Thunderbolt's descendant, the P-47, roared across ocean distances the original designers could scarcely imagine. With extra fuel tanks and longer wings, it escorted B-29s over Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and even Japan itself. It was there, in the Pacific twilight of 1945, that the last great mission of the P-47 took place. On August 8th, 2 days before the end, a flight of Thunderbolts attacked the Japanese airfield at Matsudo. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, yet every plane returned. Hours later, Japan surrendered. The machine built for Europe had helped close the final chapter of a global war. When peace came, the Thunderbolt faded quietly from the stage it had once dominated. Sleeker jets replaced it. Faster aircraft claimed its glory. But among the veterans who lived because of it, pilots and infantry, alike, the legend never dimmed. They remembered the roar, the sheer confidence of that radial engine shaking the earth. They remembered the way it would dive out of the clouds like a falling hammer, turning chaos into survival. To them, it was not just an airplane. It was an ally that never abandoned them. In museums and air shows today, the few surviving P-47s still fly, their wings gleaming under sunlight that once fell on the ruins of Europe. Their sound deep, rhythmic, defiant still carries something sacred. It speaks not only of power, but of purpose. The Thunderbolt was not born beautiful. It was born necessary. And in that necessity it found greatness. Because in the end, war does not reward elegance. It rewards endurance. And no machine of that era endured quite like the P-47 Thunderbolt. Spring, 1945. Europe lay in ruins. Cities that had thrived for centuries were now landscapes of rubble and ash. Railways severed, bridges toppled, factories silent. Across the shattered continent, one question lingered. How had the Allies achieved such total air dominance so quickly, so decisively? The answer, more than any single bomber raid or infantry assault, was written in the sky, etched in the steel and fire of the Republic. P-47 Thunderbolt. In the final months of the war, the Thunderbolt's versatility became a force multiplier, unlike anything previously imagined. Forward air controllers guided entire campaigns from the cockpit, coordinating artillery, infantry, and airstrikes simultaneously. Pilots became tacticians in flight, adapting instantly to shifting battlefield conditions. No other aircraft could transition so seamlessly from escort fighter to tactical bomber, from reconnaissance platform to psychological weapon. Over the ruined roads of the Ruhr, over the frozen fields of the Ardennes, the P-47's presence dictated the pace of movement. German convoys never rested. Wherever a tank moved, a Thunderbolt was waiting. Supply lines collapsed under relentless, precise attack. By March 1945, forward, German units reported being unable to maneuver in daylight entire armies, rendered immobile not by artillery or manpower, but by the flight of a single aircraft type. The Luftwaffe's most brilliant minds, men who had once dominated the skies of Europe, could only watch. They had trained their pilots for finesse, for specialization, for exacting superiority in a single domain. They had designed perfection in isolation. The Americans had done something radically different. They had built a machine not for one task, but for all tasks, and paired it with pilots trained to exploit that breadth. The Thunderbolt's greatest innovation, then, was not measured in horsepower or bomb load. It was strategic flexibility turning tactical precision into operational paralysis. The same aircraft that strafed rail yards in the morning could, by afternoon, destroy fuel depots, bomb bridges, and direct artillery fire with near-perfect accuracy. It was a chess piece capable of moving in any direction, a tool that could be wielded with devastating creativity. After the war, the implications of the Thunderbolt's design philosophy reverberated through military aviation. Republic aviation had created not just a fighter, but a template for the modern combat aircraft. Jets like the F-84 Thunderjet and F-86, Sabre inherited its multi-role capability. Tactical flexibility became doctrine, the division between fighter, bomber, and ground attack. Aircraft, the rigid distinctions of the 1930s, was rendered obsolete. Pilots trained under the Thunderbolt model set new professional standards. Pre-combat hours, formation flying, instrument proficiency, bombing accuracy, low-level navigation, and multi-role competence became baseline requirements for air forces worldwide. The P-47 had proven that the pilot, as much as the machine, defined combat capability. Even the most celebrated Luftwaffe aces recognized this. Post-war interviews with German veterans repeatedly noted that the Thunderbolt was relentless, durable, and terrifyingly versatile. Gall, one of Germany's top-scoring aces, reflected that flying captured P-47s revealed an unexpected elegance hidden beneath brute strength, reliability, ease of handling, and a firepower unmatched by contemporary designs. Statistics only confirmed what veterans already knew. By the war's end, the Thunderbolt had flown over 746,000 combat sorties, dropped more than 132,000 tons of bombs, and destroyed hundreds of thousands of vehicles, locomotives, and armored units. Its kill ratio in air-to-air combat was nearly 5-to-1, with an average loss rate per sortie of 0.7%, a staggering testament to the combination of engineering and training. In hindsight, the P-47 story reads as a masterclass in pragmatic adaptation. Pre-war doctrines had separated roles with rigid lines. Pursuit aircraft fought in the air. Bombers struck strategic targets. Attack aircraft supported ground troops. The Thunderbolt erased these lines. Tactical missions created strategic effects. A single aircraft could influence entire campaigns. Supply lines crumbled. Reinforcements never arrived. Bridges were destroyed before enemy engineers could react. Military theorists would later call this phenomenon cumulative tactical impact, a idea that relentless, precise tactical action, executed efficiently and repeatedly, can achieve strategic results without large-scale conventional strikes. The Thunderbolt had proven it in real time. The aircraft's influence extended far beyond World War II. Every major American combat aircraft designed afterward bore the imprint of the P-47's philosophy. The F-4 Phantom, F-105 Thunderchief, F-15E Strike Eagle, and even the F-35 Lightning II planes conceived for speed, versatility, and operational flexibility owed their conceptual lineage to the Thunderbolt. It was more than engineering. It was ideology. Build strong, build adaptable, and let operational necessity define capability. The Americans had learned to trust pragmatism over perfection, versatility over specialization, a lesson the Luftwaffe never anticipated. Yet the legacy of the Thunderbolt is not only measured in statistics or doctrine, it lives in the stories of men who flew and fought alongside it. Veterans recount returning from missions with engines smoking, wings damaged, landing gear destroyed, yet the aircraft still brought them home. They remember strafing convoys through forests, watching tanks erupt into fireballs, seeing towns liberated under a winter sun streaked with smoke. For them, the P-47 was more than a tool. It was a lifeline, a companion, a guardian in the chaos of war. Its roar carried hope, its resilience, reassurance, and in that, the machine became a symbol of American ingenuity, endurance, and determination. By the time peace settled over Europe and the Pacific, the P-47 had flown its last combat missions, yet its lessons endured. Tactical flexibility, rigorous pilot training, and engineering built for adaptability became pillars of modern air combat. The concept of a fighter capable of multiple roles became standard. Every Allied airman who followed owed their operational advantage to the machine that had first proved it could be done. And even today, when a restored Thunderbolt takes to the skies, its radial engine screaming, it reminds us that war is as much about innovation as courage, as much about adaptability as firepower, that a single aircraft, forged in steel and sweat, could tilt entire campaigns and perhaps the course of history itself. The P-47. Thunderbolt's story is more than a story of aircraft. It is a story of human ingenuity meeting necessity, of technological evolution driven by operational reality. It is the story of how adaptability and courage, when married to relentless industry and engineering excellence, can reshape the outcome of a global conflict. Above the shattered towns, over snow-clad forests, through clouds of smoke and fire, the Thunderbolt soared, not the fastest, nor the most elegant, but the one the war had demanded. In its rise, we see a lesson for all generations. Success in conflict belongs not to the perfect, but to the prepared, the adaptable, the relentless. The legacy of the Thunderbolt endures not just in museums, not just in textbooks, but in the very DNA of modern air warfare.